It was 1989. I was in the organized crime unit still. I had spent 2 years in narcotics undercover at the Camden County Prosecutor's Office before joining the organized crime unit on October 1987. I spent 2 years in the organized crime unit, remaining there until I entered the homicide division, where I spent the next 11 years. While in the organized crime unit, we were involved in undercover surveillance work. At that time, little Nicky Scarfo, Nicodemo Scarfo, was the mafia boss of the South Philadelphia faction. He was running a large bookmaking operation which spanned across a few different counties, including Camden County, New Jersey, and southern New Jersey, of course in Philadelphia as well. So we worked together with the Philadelphia organized crime units, New Jersey State Police, and on some occasions the FBI. Giovanni John Stanfa, born December the 7th, 1940, served as the mob boss in Philadelphia from 1990 to 1994. Little Nicky Scarfo had been arrested and was going to jail. I believe at this time he was in Atlantic City, New Jersey. The Scarfo faction was not happy with John Stanfa, who was a Sicilian immigrant from Italy. He had been groomed by the old-timers and sent into Philadelphia to straighten out the leadership of the mob at that time. Another guy, I believe related to little Nicky Scarfo, was skinny Joey Merlino. He wasn't happy with the fact he was being pushed out to be the mafia chief. So he and his Young Turks, they were called, who were soldiers in the Philadelphia mob faction at that time, decided to engage in what was later known as the international underworld conflict, the Philadelphia Mafia Wars. During that time, Skinny Joey had put a hit on John Stanfa. John Stanfa was driving in a car one day on a major highway in the South Philadelphia, South Jersey region, and his vehicle was assaulted with gunfire. During that gunfire, Stanfa's son was shot and severely injured. This, of course, meant that Stanfa had to retaliate against Skinny Joey. They did. Skinny Joey was shot up, damn near killed. Earlier than that, the Chicken Man, Testa, was killed at a bombing at his residence as he was leaving his home in South Philadelphia. The wars were raging. There were mob hits going on constantly during that era, both taking place in Philadelphia and in New Jersey. Now, the Young Turks were a force to be reckoned with. They were a bunch of young soldiers working under the leadership of Skinny Joey and not wanting to conform to the new rules of the new boss, John Stanfa. So there were a lot of attempts on a lot of different individuals, some of them successful, some of them not so successful. But on March 17th of 1994, the FBI indicted Stanfa and over 20 of his soldiers who were charged with racketeering-related charges, including murder, conspiracy, bookmaking, all sorts of organized crime involvement. Now, at that time, John Stanfa was represented by an attorney by the name of Salvatore Avena. He was not only Stanfa's private attorney, but he was a long-time criminal defense lawyer. He was an old-school guy. He had his office situated downtown in Camden, New Jersey. Matter of fact, if you looked out of my office when I was in the old homicide squad at the Parkade building, we could look down from my window and see the offices of Salvatore Avena, and we would note On several occasions, both day and night, he would get visits from organized crime main men, including John Stanfa. Well, the FBI were very much aware of this fact, and they became aware and believed that Salvatore Avena was heavily involved in daily mafia activities. So they were able to go to a federal judge and convince the judge that they wanted to collect organized crime information undercover inside the offices of Salvatore J. Avena. The bug was granted. A listening device was approved for the FBI to plant it in Salvatore J. Avena's office in hopes of catching John Stanfa and many of his soldiers discussing the business and everyday activities of organized crime figures. So they broke into the offices of Sal Avena, and they were looking for a place, ideally, to place the bug. Well, in Salvatore Avena's main office, you could look across from his desk as he would be seated at the desk, and on that adjacent wall was a large picture of a battleship. The battleship was a World War II battleship in rough waters, and it had a caption underneath of it on the frame. It said, "Loose lips sink ships." That was a phrase coined during 1940s, during the World War II era. Bingo, a perfect place to insert the bug. So they went behind that large photograph and implanted a listening device in it, and it came to fruition. Thousands of dirty conversations between John Stanfa, the boss of the Philadelphia, South Jersey crime faction, with Salvatore J. Avena and numerous mob affiliates who would also speak not only on the telephone with Sal Avena, but who would come to his office in person, where daily mafia operations would be discussed. Now, Avena was eventually indicted on racketeering with John Stanfa and his crew. They were convicted at trial in 1995. John Stanfa was sentenced on July the 9th, 1996, to life in prison. Sal Avena was acquitted in 1996 of the mafia-related crimes. However, he was definitely noted as a tough old-school lawyer with deep organized crime connections. He was a gangster all of his life. He continued law practice. He never admitted to any wrongdoing, but he died at the age of 87 in 2014. Stanfa, on the other hand, was convicted at trial in 1995, as I stated, for racketeering and mob-related offenses. And I believe he is still currently in prison serving out his life sentence. I recall being tapped and involved in the roundup of John Stanfa, Sal Avena, and approximately 26 mob soldiers who were caught up in the gambling rage of that era. They were rounded up in several counties across South Jersey and Philadelphia, and most of them were brought to a holding jail cell center in downtown Camden at the federal courthouse. There were prison cells on the ground floor, and in one of those prison cells was housed John Stanfa, boss of the South Philadelphia Mafia, and his attorney, Salvatore Avena. I walked by the cell during booking operations and observed Stanfa and Avena standing side by side inside of one of the cells, having a hushed conversation, both in their Italian smoking jacket t-shirt and their silk boxer shorts. What a sight to see. During my 2 years in the organized crime unit, between 1987 and 1989, we were involved in continuing our investigations into organized crime and bookmaking. My task was to follow Salvatore Sparacio, a.k.a. Shotsie. Shotsie was a long-time crime family bookmaker. He was actually a capo in the Bruno, Scarfo, and Stanfa eras. He had been elevated to the rank of capo. He was in charge of a crew, and he headed up all the booking and gambling operations, both in Philadelphia and New Jersey. In the early 80s, I believe, he was baptized as capo. Now, during my surveillances of him, one of the things we did, along with the state police, is we got a warrant to put a bug in Shotsie's personal vehicle, a vehicle that he used every day. Now, we knew that he would pick up various crime figures from throughout both cities, and we believed he was having mafia-related conversations while in his car and on the phone in his car. So now our task was figure out a way that we could plant a bug, and where could we plant it to gather some of these conversations. So we sought permission from the courts to put a bug in his vehicle. His vehicle would be parked at his Gloucester Township townhome, usually in front of his residence. No one else on the street would dare take up his parking spot. At that time, he had a beautiful yellow Cadillac Eldorado convertible. And on this particular evening that we were on surveillance, it was parked right out front of his townhome, as expected. So we waited. We set up our surveillance, and we watched. We watched until about 2:30, 3 o'clock in the morning, with warrant in hand to place the bug in his car. But first, we had to steal his car from his parking spot and immediately replace it with another high-end yellow Cadillac Eldorado convertible. So it had two purposes. One, his parking spot would not be taken by anyone else. And two, if anyone would happen to look out the window, it would appear that Sparacio's car was still in place. We had to be careful. State police quickly entered the vehicle, removed the vehicle. The dummy vehicle was put in its place. But as they were removing the vehicle from the parking spot, something unbelievable happened. One of Sparacio's young daughters was just coming home from a night out, either partying or working late. I believe she may have been a bartender at that particular point in time and was coming home after the bars had closed. At any rate, she caught the state police guys as they were pulling his car out of the parking spot. We thought, that's it, we're done, case blown. Well, now all we could do was hold our breath. We did that, and it was grueling for the next several hours, waiting for Shotsie to get up, go out to his car, and we believed he'd be ripping it apart, looking for a bugging device, and the case would be blown. But it didn't happen. As usual, Shotsie drove over the bridge to Philadelphia, stopped at a couple spots, picked up a few of his cronies, rode around the city and even on into South Jersey, and continued to have mob-related organized crime conversations in his vehicle. And also he could be heard on the phone talking to various bookies spread out throughout the city and in South Jersey. We were thrilled. Well, that information led us to continue the surveillances. Now we had to try to get a phone that he was using in order to place his bets and check on his bookies. My task was to follow Salvatore Sparacio and see what information I could glean. On this particular day, I got very lucky. I was following him he went to a Gulf gas station on Clements Bridge Road, right on the borderline between Runnymede and Barrington, New Jersey. There, with my binoculars, I had set up across the street up on a hill in a parking lot of the Presidential Court Apartments, which gave me a perfect bird's eye view down to the Gulf station. I could look into the office where I see Sparacio enter the office and go right for the office phone. I could tell by his mannerisms and the way his body is moving and the way his arms are flailing. I was hoping and believing that he was probably having conversations about organized crime, but we had to find out. So when he departed, and he was on the phone for quite a while there, we were able to get the phone number of that phone at that gas station. We then applied for the toll records for that phone and the DNRs, the dialed number recordings of who he called. That supplied us with several other phone numbers of people we believed were in the organized crime bookmaking business. Bingo, pay dirt. We cashed in on that. We set up wiretaps at our undisclosed office location in the organized crime unit of the prosecutor's office. Sam Asbell was the prosecutor at that time. Perhaps some of you have heard of him. He was the current prosecutor, but he didn't believe he was going to be reappointed by the then Governor James Florio. So he faked 2 assassination attempts on his own life, which the homicide unit investigated, by the way. Little do people know he had tried that same fake assassination attempt approximately 2 weeks prior to when it finally went public on his second attempt to claim that he was being shot at by drug dealers. New Jersey State Police was also involved in that internal investigation, and what finally broke the case about him faking his own assassination was while they were interviewing him one day in his office, he was wearing a sweater, and he stated that he happened to be wearing that same sweater during the assassination attempt on his life. State police kept on him. They said, yeah, by the way, we need that sweater. We want to send it in to our lab for forensic testing. There's got to be some glass particles from your window still in that sweater, embedded. Sam said, oh, well, no, it's been washed since then. Well, they wanted to confiscate it at any rate. They kept interviewing him, or I should say interrogating him, and he finally confessed. After being relieved from his prosecutorship, he spent a small stint in a psychiatric unit and was eventually returned to the practice of law after being suspended from it for some time. So, once that investigation was coming to a close, and since I was the detective that spotted the phone being used by Shotsie, I was awarded his yellow Cadillac convertible to be used as my undercover vehicle, and I was given the privilege of snapping the handcuffs on Mr. Sparacio and taking him into the Cherry Hill Police Department for booking. I recall specifically, as I was walking him from my detective vehicle into the Cherry Hill Police Department, he was handcuffed in front. News media was all over the place, and I had asked him, I said, would you like me to throw my jacket over the handcuffs so the media doesn't make a circus out of you coming in here? After all, he was a capo in the Philadelphia mob. He just shrugged his shoulders, made a scowl on his face and said, nah, F him. Let Sammy get his jollies off. I don't give a shit. And he just walked in there, took his medicine like a man. I remember that. And I also remember this. After I had had his car for a while, I was running it through the car wash in Collingswood, New Jersey. Well, unbeknownst to me, his daughter worked there as a cashier. I'm going through the car wash, and I get up to the cashier. She spots her father's car and me being the driver of it. Well, she goes completely ballistic. You MFer, that's my effing father's car. You son of a bitch. Ba, 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 ba. She's going on and on and on. To the point where I had to notify the Collingswood Police Department, who responded, and they quelled the situation. I don't recall if she was arrested for anything that day, but she was definitely disturbing the peace. I remember inquiring, and I believe I was told this by the very adept Philadelphia organized crime guys. Like I said, we were working with them quite a bit. And I asked, how did Shotsie get the name Shotsie? Because that was his nickname. And their understanding was, through talking to various other crime mob figures and whatnot, the story was that during a bank robbery in New York City back in the day, Shotsie was one of the crew doing the robbery. When he walked in, he was all masked up and he was carrying a sawed-off shotgun. And to announce their presence and the fact that this was a bank robbery, he blew off a round in the ceiling of the bank. And from that day forward, his nickname was Shotsie. Now, in several news articles pertaining to the arrest of these individuals, when Stanfa and Avena and Shotsie and all these guys were finally rounded up and everything, there were about 26 mob soldiers tied in to these arrests for bookmaking and racketeering. When Nicodemo Scarfo was arrested and John Stanfa was being inducted as the new boss of the Philadelphia Mafia, it was reported in the Courier Post newspaper after these arrests that Nicodemo Scarfo, when he had it and he was in charge of overseeing Salvatore Sparacio in the bookmaking business, it was at that time $1 million a day enterprise. Did you hear me right? That was $1 million a day illegal gambling operation headed by the capo Salvatore Sparacio, a.k.a. Shotsie. Now, by the time we arrested Shotsie, and after all the intelligence gathered by the New Jersey State Police, the FBI, and our organization, along with the Philadelphia Organized Crime Squad, we believed that that number was pale in reality. It was probably closer to a couple of $1 million a day operation by then. As a side note, with respect to Salvatore Sparacio, I remember surveilling him one day after a pretty good-sized snowstorm had hit South Jersey. There was a couple of feet of snow on the ground, and I'm out there watching him at his house. At that time, he had a different vehicle, and I put a tail on him as he left his home, and he's driving. He had by now been like a few miles away from his home, and the car breaks down on him. Now here's a man in his 60s at that time. Car breaks down, he gets out of the car, pops the hood, looks under there, realizes it's beyond his repair capabilities, closes the hood, locks the car up, and starts walking home through 2 foot of snow. I was impressed, to tell you the truth, the way this guy just shrugged his shoulders back and forth and plunged his feet into that 2 feet deep snow and just walked home like he was a 25-year-old United States Marine. I mean, this old man just didn't faze him one bit that he was dealing with 2 feet of snow. But he walked home and got help for his vehicle. Now, according to records, Sparacio died in a Missouri prison. As a matter of fact, it was in the Springfield, Missouri on September the 20th of 2018. He was 96 years old. It is documented that he was in fact the oldest inmate to die in custody at that time. Now, in closing, I'm sure perhaps some of you may have asked yourselves, I wonder what happened when the daughter came home and caught the state police moving her gangster father's car out of its parking spot. Well, I wondered that as well. So during the arrest of Sparacio, and teams were at his home with a search warrant, searching his residence and interviewing persons and whoever was found within the home at the time of that arrest. His daughter was taken down to headquarters and eventually asked the question, so, on that night that we were removing your father's car from his parking spot, now remember, by now, word was out, the search warrants they had in their hand, they were given basically all the preliminary information as to why he was being arrested, what evidence we had on him, and so forth. Well, she was eventually asked, I'm not sure if it was that day or subsequently after that, but she was definitely asked, why didn't you tell your father when you saw the car being moved out of its parking spot? Her response was, are you kidding me? My father goes out all hours of the day and night. I never know when he's going to go out or why he's going out. We don't ask him. But when I saw the car moving that day as I was coming home, I just thought it was him going out and had some business to take care of or whatever. I didn't give it a second thought. And that was the answer. That explained it. That's why he was never tipped off that we had placed a bug in his personal car, right under his nose, while he slept peacefully. So, I named this one, All Bets Are Off. This is Detective Sergeant First Class Harry Gavel, retired Camden County Prosecutor's Office Homicide Division. I hope you enjoyed this story, and I hope you tune in again. See us next time.